The war was over. But the world of Alara Prime still looked like it was dying. The air was heavy with the smell of ash, and the skies were a dull gray that never cleared. Buildings that once reached for the clouds now lay broken and hollow. Their steel frames twisted like bones. The streets were cracked and filled with pieces of homes, toys, clothes, and lives that would never return. Lyra walked slowly through the ruins, her steps uneven. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt, and her body weak from hunger. She had been searching for days, searching for something, anything. But deep down, she knew she was looking for only one thing: her daughters. They had been with her the night the enemy ships came. Sirens had screamed across the city, telling everyone to hide. She had taken her girls, ran to the shelter, and held them close as the bombs fell. But then the ground shook, the walls split, and she was thrown into darkness. When she woke up, they were gone. At first, she thought they had been taken to another shelter. She searched every camp, asked every survivor. No one had seen them. Many told her not to hope, but she could not let go. She refused to believe they were gone forever. Every day she wandered farther into the wreckage, ignoring the cold and the danger, clinging to the thin thread of hope. On the other side of the city, Captain Ethan Cole moved carefully through the ruins. He was human, wearing the dark blue uniform of the Earth Relief Corps. His mission was simple but never easy: find survivors, bring them to safety. Humans had not started this war, but they had fought in it, and now some stayed behind to help rebuild what was left. Ethan had been searching for hours, moving debris and calling out, but no one answered. Most of the survivors had already been rescued. Those still here were either hiding too deep to be found or worse. Still, he kept going. Experience had taught him that sometimes, against all odds, there was life in the silence. He stopped at the corner of a collapsed building, scanning the area. The streets were quiet except for the wind. He was about to move on when something caught his ear, a faint sound almost lost under the rustle of debris. It was soft, weak, but unmistakable. A child's cry. Ethan's heart kicked into gear. He turned toward the sound, moving quickly but carefully, following it past the broken wall and into what used to be a small shelter. The entrance was blocked by chunks of concrete and twisted steel. He set down his pack and started clearing, his gloves scraping against the cold metal. The cry came again. Louder this time, and now he could hear a second, smaller voice. His movements became faster. He pulled away a slab of concrete and peered inside. In the dim light, he saw two small figures huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide with fear. They were alien children, no older than 6. Their skin was a pale shade of violet, their hair dark and tangled. Both wore torn clothes, and their tiny hands clutched each other tightly. They stared at him, unsure whether he was a threat or a savior. "Hey, it's okay," Ethan said softly. Though he knew they could not understand his language, he crouched low, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I'm here to help." One of the girls flinched when he reached out, but the other stared at him for a long moment. Maybe it was the way his tone didn't match the sounds of war they had heard before. Maybe it was because she had no other choice. Slowly, she loosened her grip on her sister. Ethan slid inside the shelter, careful not to scare them. He pulled an emergency blanket from his pack and wrapped it around their small bodies. The younger one shivered, so he gently lifted her into his arms. She was so light it made his chest ache. The older girl held his sleeve, refusing to let go. "Let's get you out of here," he murmured, glancing at the blocked entrance. Carrying one girl and guiding the other, he made his way back into the open air. The wind was sharp, and he could feel them trembling against him. They didn't speak, only watched him with wary eyes. He could see the hunger in their faces, the exhaustion in their tiny frames. They had likely been here for days without food or clean water. Whatever had happened to their family, they had survived, barely. Ethan knew there was a refugee camp a few miles away where they could be safe. But more than that, he knew these girls had someone, somewhere, searching for them. He didn't know who. He didn't even know if that person was still alive. But he had made a silent promise to himself the moment he saw them. He would find their family. He looked down at the girl in his arms. Her head rested against his shoulder now, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. The older one still walked beside him, holding his sleeve like it was the only anchor she had in the world. "Don't worry," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "I'm not leaving you." As they moved deeper into the ruins, the sound of distant thunder rolled across the gray sky. Rain would come soon, and with it, the cold would bite harder. Ethan tightened his grip on the girl he carried and picked up his pace. Somewhere out there, he hoped, was the person who loved them enough to never stop searching. He didn't know it yet, but that person was closer than either of them could imagine. And in the ruins of a broken world, two paths were about to cross. The sky over Ilara Prime had grown darker, heavy clouds pressing low above the broken city. The wind carried a cold edge, making every shadow feel deeper and every sound sharper. Ethan Cole moved carefully through the debris, the younger girl, still in his arms, and the older one gripping his sleeve like she would never let go. Their steps echoed faintly in the empty streets. The ruins seemed to close in around them. Fallen walls, crushed vehicles, shattered windows staring like empty eyes. Ethan kept his senses alert, scanning for any movement. The war might have ended, but danger had not vanished. Scavengers, desperate survivors, and stray patrols from hostile factions still roamed the city. The older girl stumbled on a piece of broken stone, nearly falling. Ethan stopped instantly, kneeling beside her. He didn't know her name yet, but he could see the stubborn will in her eyes. She shook her head as if to say she was fine, but her small legs trembled from exhaustion. Without thinking, Ethan crouched and motioned for her to climb onto his back. She hesitated, then slowly obeyed. Soon, he was carrying both children, one in his arms, one clinging to his shoulders. They were so light, yet he could feel the weight of their trust pressing against him. "Hang on, we're almost there," he murmured, though the refugee camp was still miles away. As they moved forward, Ethan thought about the faint hope he carried. These girls had someone, somewhere, searching for them. Maybe their mother, maybe another relative, but deep down, he hoped it was their mother, because the way they clung to each other told him they had already lost too much. Far across the ruins, Lyra sat by a small fire in a makeshift shelter, the flickering light reflected in her tired eyes. She had managed to trade a small piece of jewelry for bread, but she barely touched it. Every bite she took felt wrong while she didn't know if her daughters were alive. The camp around her was restless. Refugees spoke in low voices, exchanging bits of news. Some were true, some were lies, and some were cruel guesses about who had survived and who hadn't. That's when Lyra overheard a whisper from two alien women sitting nearby. "They say a human soldier found 2 children in the North Sector," one said. "Are you sure?" the other asked. "Yes. He carried them out himself, took them toward the refugee zone." Lyra's heart froze. She turned quickly, her voice breaking as she asked, "What did they look like? Do you know?" The women exchanged glances, then shrugged. Small, maybe 5 or 6 years old. They were together. That's all we heard. Lyra stood up without another word. Her legs felt weak, but her heart was racing. The description matched her daughter's. She didn't care if it was only a rumor. She had to see for herself. Without waiting for the storm to pass or for anyone to stop her, she wrapped her scarf tighter and slipped into the cold streets. Back in the ruins, Ethan's pace slowed as the wind picked up, scattering dust and ash around them. The older girl shivered against his back. He shifted his grip, holding both children tighter. They reached a wide street, half buried under collapsed buildings. Across the open space, Ethan could see the faint outline of the path toward the refugee camp. But between them and safety lay a dangerous stretch, an exposed area where they could easily be seen. He scanned the area, listening. Then a noise broke through the wind, footsteps, too heavy and steady to be from a child. He quickly ducked into the remains of a shop, crouching low. The girls stayed silent, their instincts telling them to hide. Ethan peered through a crack in the wall and saw 3 figures moving down the street. They wore mismatched armor, carrying weapons that looked scavenged from the battlefield. Scavengers. If they saw him with the children, they might take the girls, or worse. Ethan waited, heart steady, until the group passed out of sight. Then, he slipped back into the street, moving quickly toward the side alleys. The detour cost him time, but it kept them safe. At the same time, Lyra was making her way through another part of the city. She had to pass through the industrial ruins, where the air was thick with the smell of oil and burned metal. Her steps were fast, but she stayed alert. A sudden shout made her freeze. From the shadows, a group of armed men stepped out, blocking her path. Their leader, a tall figure with scarred skin, looked her up and down. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" he asked in a harsh tone. Lyra didn't answer. She tried to walk around them, but one stepped in her way. Before things could escalate, the sound of approaching engines broke the tension. A human patrol vehicle turned the corner, its bright lights sweeping over the group. The scavengers scattered instantly, not wanting to deal with soldiers. One of the patrolmen leaned out. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. "Get in. We're heading to the refugee zone." Lyra hesitated, but the thought of her daughters pushed her forward. She climbed in, the vehicle speeding toward the same destination Ethan was trying to reach. By the time Ethan reached the edge of the refugee camp, the rain had started to fall, cold drops soaking his uniform and dripping into the girl's hair. He could see the camp's lights in the distance, flickering through the mist. "Almost there," he told them softly. The younger girl stirred, opening her eyes just enough to glance at him. For the first time, he thought he saw something in her gaze other than fear, maybe the beginning of trust. He carried them into the camp, past the guards, and straight to the medical tent. The staff rushed forward, speaking in a mix of human and alien languages. Ethan set the younger girl gently onto a bed, while the older one stayed glued to his side. As the medics examined them, Ethan stepped back. His job wasn't over. He still had to find the person they belonged to. What he didn't know was that Lyra was already on her way, the rain following her footsteps as she drew closer to the camp, and to the moment that would change everything. Rain poured harder over Alara Prime, turning the broken streets into rivers of mud and ash. The sound of it filled the air, mixing with the faint hum of generators from the refugee camp. Under the dim lights of the camp's entrance, Ethan stood, just outside the medical tent, watching the 2 girls being cared for. They were safe now, wrapped in dry blankets, given warm food, and resting on clean beds. The older one kept glancing toward the tent flap, as if afraid he would leave. The younger one had fallen asleep almost as soon as she touched the pillow. Ethan stayed close. His mission was complete, but his promise to himself was not. He had told them, silently in his heart, that he would find their family. Until that happened, he wasn't going anywhere. Miles away, Lyra's transport vehicle bumped along the uneven road. Inside, she sat on the cold metal seat, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her mind kept circling, the same thought. Please let it be them. She imagined their faces, the way they laughed when she told bedtime stories, the small hands that used to cling to her whenever loud noises scared them. Those memories felt like treasures. But they also hurt, because she didn't know if she would see them again. A soldier sitting across from her glanced at her. "You've been quiet the whole ride," he said. Lyra didn't look up. I have. Somewhere I need to be, she replied softly. The soldier didn't press further. Outside, the rain blurred the outlines of the ruins, but the camp's lights were finally visible in the distance. In the medical tent, Ethan knelt beside the older girl, trying to learn something about her. Do you know your name? He asked, slowly using hand gestures to help. She hesitated, then pointed to herself. Sana. He smiled. Sana? That's pretty. He then pointed to the younger one, still sleeping. And her? Sana's voice was barely a whisper. Mera. Ethan repeated the names quietly to himself. Sana and Mera. He had at least one piece of the puzzle now. He turned to the camp officer who had been organizing the day's records. Can you check the refugee lists? Ethan asked. Look for any relatives, especially a mother, asking for 2 girls named Sana and Mera. The officer nodded and went to the small comm station. Meanwhile, the vehicle carrying Lyra reached the camp gate. Guards stepped forward, their flashlights sweeping over the passengers. Lyra stepped out quickly, explaining to the officer on duty that she had heard about 2 children rescued by a human soldier. The guard frowned slightly. We've had a few rescues today. You'll need to check with the medical tent. But be ready. Sometimes the details people hear are wrong. Lyra's stomach twisted, but she nodded. Just tell me where to go. Back in the tent, the officer returned to Ethan. We've got a match, he said. There's a woman named Lyra in our records, registered in the southern sector. She's been asking for 2 girls since the day she arrived. Ethan straightened. Where is she now? The officer hesitated. We don't know. She left the southern camp this morning. No one's seen her since. Ethan's mind raced. If she was out there in this weather, she might be struggling to make it here. He didn't want to imagine her wandering the dangerous streets alone. But before he could say anything more, a sudden shout came from outside the tent. Patrol incoming! New arrivals! Ethan stepped out, the rain instantly soaking his uniform again. He saw the patrol vehicle pull up at the gate, and from it, a woman stepped down, moving with the kind of urgency only desperation could give. Her eyes darted around, searching the camp like she expected to find something important. Ethan didn't need to guess who she was. Lyra's heart pounded as she scanned the tents, her eyes sharp despite the rain blurring her vision. Then she saw him, a tall human in a dark uniform, standing in the rain and looking straight at her. Are you Ethan Cole? She asked, her voice unsteady. Yes, he replied, stepping closer, and I think I found who you're looking for? Her breath caught. My daughters? Sana and Mera? He nodded. They're safe. They're inside the medical tent. Lyra's hands flew to her mouth as if to hold back the wave of emotions threatening to spill out. Without another word, she ran toward the tent, her steps splashing through puddles. Ethan followed, watching as she pushed through the entrance. Inside, Sana looked up at the sound of the flap opening. Her eyes widened. Mama, she whispered. In an instant, she was off the bed, running into her mother's arms. Mera stirred awake, blinking in confusion, then let out a small cry before rushing to join them. Lyra dropped to her knees, holding both girls close, her tears mixing with the rain still clinging to her face. You're here. You're both here, she whispered over and over. Ethan stood quietly at the edge of the tent, his chest tightening at the sight. It was moments like this that made every risk worth it. For several minutes, Lyra didn't let go of her daughters. Finally, she looked up at Ethan. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to, Ethan replied simply. Just take care of them. That's enough. The rain outside had softened, the storm finally beginning to pass. But inside the tent, warmth filled the air, not from the heaters, but from the quiet joy of a family made whole again. Still, the war's shadow lingered. The camp was temporary, the city outside was dangerous. And even though they were together now, the road ahead would not be easy. But for tonight, none of that mattered. They had survived. They had found each other. And that was more than enough. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle by the time the medical staff finished checking Sana and Mera. The girls were tired but unharmed, and the warmth of the camp gave them some color back in their cheeks. Lyra sat beside their bed, still, holding their hands as if letting go would make them vanish. Ethan stood near the entrance, speaking quietly with the camp officer. "How long can they stay here?" he asked. "A day or two at most," the officer replied. "Supplies are low, and we're moving groups to the larger camp in the Central District. But the roads aren't safe. There's been trouble in the Northern Passage." Ethan didn't like the sound of that. Trouble in the Northern Passage usually meant armed scavengers or remnants of enemy soldiers who hadn't surrendered. Either way, it wasn't a place for children. He turned his gaze back to Lyra. She was listening, her expression tightening at the words, "not safe." She didn't speak, but he could tell she was thinking the same thing he was. Moving her daughters would be risky. That night, the camp lights flickered as the generators struggled against the damp air. People huddled under blankets, whispering about the rumors from the north. Ethan stayed awake, his instincts telling him this situation wasn't stable. Before dawn, the camp leader made the decision. Everyone in this sector would be moved to the Central District within the next 24 hours. There was no choice. The supply lines were too weak, and this camp couldn't hold. Lyra's first thought was for her daughters. She looked at Ethan. "Will you be with us?" He nodded, without hesitation. "I'll make sure you get there." Morning brought a pale, cold light. The rain had stopped, but the streets outside were slick and dangerous. A convoy of 3 trucks and 1 patrol vehicle was prepared to take the refugees. Lyra and her daughters climbed into the second truck, Ethan sitting near the back with his rifle slung across his chest. The convoy rolled out slowly, weaving through broken streets. Sana leaned against her mother, eyes half closed, while Mera sat on her lap, clutching the blanket tightly. Ethan kept scanning the rooftops and alleyways, watching for movement. For the first hour, the road was quiet. Then the lead truck slowed, suddenly, and the driver raised a hand. Something was blocking the path ahead. Ethan jumped down to check. A pile of debris had been dragged into the street, too neatly arranged to be natural. His gut tightened. "This is an ambush," he muttered. Before. The words had even faded, movement flickered on the rooftops. Shadows rose. Armed scavengers. Their weapons aimed at the convoy. "Everyone down!" Ethan shouted. Chaos erupted. The drivers slammed the trucks into reverse, but the scavengers opened fire, forcing them to stop. Refugees ducked behind whatever cover they could find. Ethan moved fast, positioning himself between the attackers and the second truck, between them and Lyra's daughters. Bullets struck the metal side of the vehicle, sending sharp sounds into the air. "Stay low," he told Lyra, crouching beside her for a brief second before returning fire. The patrol vehicle in the rear roared forward, soldiers jumping out to join the defense. Ethan worked with them, moving from cover to cover, forcing the scavengers to retreat from their positions. But more attackers spilled from the side streets trying to encircle the convoy. Ethan realized they weren't just after supplies, they were after the refugees themselves. Inside the truck, Sana clung to her mother, her small body trembling. Mera buried her face in Lyra's shoulder. Lyra stroked their hair, whispering that everything would be okay, even though her own hands shook. She could hear Ethan outside, his voice sharp and commanding as he coordinated with the patrol soldiers. Every few seconds, his rifle cracked through. The air followed by the shouts of the scavengers. The fight dragged on, but slowly, the sound of gunfire began to fade. The scavengers were pulling back, realizing the convoy was too well defended. When the last shots echoed away, Ethan stepped back to the truck, his chest rising and falling heavily. "We're clear, for now," he said, "but we need to move before they regroup." The drivers wasted no time. Within minutes, the convoy was rolling again, faster this time, avoiding any more stops. Ethan stayed alert, riding in the open. Patrol vehicle now, so he could watch all angles. Lyra met his eyes as the trucks moved. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything: gratitude, relief, and something else. Trust. Hours later, the convoy finally reached the Central District camp. It was larger, with higher fences, better defenses, and more stable supply lines. Guards opened the gates, waving them through. As soon as the trucks stopped, medical staff came to check the new arrivals. Ethan stayed back, letting Lyra and her daughters settle in. The camp leader, a human woman with a firm voice, approached him. "We could use people like you here," she said, "but I think you already have people you're looking after." Ethan glanced toward Lyra, who was sitting with Sana and Mira near one of the heaters. They were talking softly, their faces calmer than he had seen since meeting them. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." That night, for the first time in weeks, Lyra slept with both her daughters beside her. The distant sounds of war still lingered beyond the camp's borders, but inside these fences, there was a fragile peace. Ethan stood watch at the edge of the camp, his rifle resting against his shoulder. He knew the danger wasn't gone. It never truly was in a world like this. But he also knew that as long as he was here, nothing would harm them without going through him first. And after everything they had survived, he was ready for whatever came next. The Central District camp was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that made people believe for a few hours that the war was truly over. Most of the refugees were asleep, the faint sound of rain tapping against the tents. Heaters hummed, softly, casting a warm glow inside. In one of the larger sleeping tents, Lyra lay between her daughters. Sana was curled against her side, breathing evenly, while Mira clutched her blanket, her small hand resting on her mother's arm. For the first time since the war began, Lyra felt a sense of safety. Fragile, but real. Outside, Ethan was on guard duty. He walked along the perimeter fence, his boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the dark streets beyond the camp lights. Hours passed without incident, but as the moon hid behind clouds, Ethan noticed movement in the distance, shadows shifting where no one should be. He stopped, raising his rifle slightly. Then came the sound. Faint at first, then sharper. Metal scraping against metal. It was coming from the far side of the fence. Ethan tapped his comm device. "We've got movement outside the east wall. Possible hostiles." The reply was quick. "Hold position. Back up on the way." But before reinforcements could arrive, the first explosion hit. The blast shook the ground, sending dirt and smoke into the air. Alarms blared across the camp as people stumbled from their tents in confusion. Children cried, adults shouted orders. Ethan ran toward the east side, his rifle ready. Through the smoke, he saw figures rushing toward the gap in the fence, armed raiders, their weapons raised. "Everyone get to the shelters," he shouted, firing warning shots to slow the attackers. Inside the sleeping tent, Lyra woke with a start as the alarm screamed. Sana and Mira clung to her, wide-eyed with fear. "Mama, what's happening?" Mira asked in a trembling voice. "Stay close to me," Lyra said, quickly grabbing the small bag of supplies she always kept ready. She pushed through the tent flap into the chaos outside. The camp was in motion, soldiers rushing to the wall, medics guiding people toward the reinforced shelters. In the distance, she saw Ethan, moving fast and shouting to the guards. A second explosion erupted, closer this time. Lyra ducked with her daughters, shielding them as debris rained down. Ethan spotted them immediately. "Lyra, this way!" he called, waving them toward a smaller path that led behind the medical station. She didn't hesitate, running toward him with both girls in her arms. Ethan met them halfway, taking Sana into his own arms to move faster. "The shelters are on the other side of the camp!" he said quickly. "Stay behind me, and don't stop!" Gunfire cracked through the air as the raiders pushed forward. Camp guards returned fire, but the attackers were determined. Halfway to the shelters, they were forced to stop. One of the smaller gates had been breached, and 3 raiders were charging through. Ethan set Sana down behind a water tank and stepped forward, his rifle steady. "Stay down," he told Lyra firmly. The fight was short, but intense. Ethan dropped. The first 2 raiders with precise shots, while a camp soldier tackled the third. Once the path was clear, he waved them forward again. But just as they neared the shelter entrance, another explosion struck the far side of the camp, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Inside the shelter, dozens of refugees were already gathered, their voices hushed with fear. Lyra guided her daughters to a corner, pulling them close. Ethan stood near the entrance, keeping watch with 2 other guards. After a few tense minutes, a soldier ran in with an update. "East side secure. Attackers are falling back. We're sweeping the area now." Ethan exhaled slowly, but didn't. "Relax. Stay in here until we get the all clear," he told Lyra. She nodded, looking down at her daughters. They were shaking, but safe. An hour later, the alarms finally stopped. The attackers had been driven away, leaving behind damaged fences and a few burning supply crates. The camp had survived, but the message was clear. No place was truly safe. For long, Ethan returned to the shelter to escort Lyra and the girls back to their tent. As they stepped into the cool night air, the smoke from the fires hung low, mixing with the damp mist. Lyra glanced at him. "If you hadn't seen us, if you hadn't been there, you would have made it," Ethan said, though his tone carried no certainty. "But I wasn't going to take that chance." Her gaze softened. "You've saved them twice now." Ethan shook his head. "I just do what needs to be done." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Somewhere along the way, protecting Lyra and her daughters had stopped feeling like a duty and started feeling personal. That night, the camp repaired the damage and doubled the number of guards. The rain began again, light and steady, tapping on the canvas roofs. In their tent, Lyra lay awake for a long time, listening to her daughter's steady breathing. She thought about everything that had happened since she'd found them again, and about the human soldier who had been there at every step. Ethan, standing watch once more, didn't know what the next day would bring. But one thing was certain. As long as he was alive, no one was going to take those girls away again. The sun rose slowly over the Central District camp, breaking through the gray clouds for the first time in weeks. Its light spread across the wet ground, turning puddles into small mirrors. The air was cold but calmer, carrying the quiet after a storm. Lyra stepped outside her tent, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Sana and Mira were still asleep inside, their small bodies curled together under the blanket. For the first time since the war began, they had slept through the night, without waking from fear. Ethan was already awake, sitting on a crate near the camp's perimeter. His rifle rested beside him, and he was repairing a torn strap on his gear. When he saw Lyra, he gave her a small nod. "Morning," he said quietly. She walked over, the early light catching the tired lines on her face. "Morning. I heard we didn't have any trouble last night." "None," Ethan replied. "The guards doubled the watch. The raiders won't try again soon." There was a brief silence between them, broken only by the distant hum of camp generators. Finally, Lyra spoke. "What happens now?" For us? It was a question Ethan had been thinking about. The camp was safe for now, but it was temporary. The Central District could not hold so many people forever. Soon, families would be moved again, to safer zones or even off-world, if they could get transport. "There are resettlement programs," Ethan said. "Some will go to colonies. Some will go back to rebuild their cities if it's possible." "You could apply." Lyra looked down. "And what about you?" He hesitated. "I'll probably be assigned to another relief mission, maybe somewhere worse than here." The thought made her chest feel heavier. She had only known Ethan for a short time, But in that time, he had done more for her family than anyone else. She didn't like the idea of him disappearing into another war zone. Later that day, the camp gathered in the central square. The leader stood on a platform explaining the next steps. Groups would be formed for relocation, some leaving within days. Names were read aloud, and each family was told where they would be sent. When Lyra's name came up, she was told she could either join a group traveling to a rebuilt alien settlement or apply for transport to a mixed-species colony where human and alien survivors were working together. She glanced at Ethan, who stood nearby. The choice wasn't simple. The settlement would be close to her people's traditions, but it was still unstable. The mixed colony was safer, but it was far from the home she once knew. And then there was another thought she didn't say out loud. If she left for the settlement, she might never see Ethan again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she found him near the edge of the camp, looking out over the distant skyline. "I've been thinking," she said, stopping beside him, "about where we should go." He turned to her. "And?" "I don't want to keep running," she said softly. "But I also don't want my daughters to grow up in a place where danger could come back at any moment." She looked at him steadily. "You said the colony is safer." "It is," he said, "but it's far, and it's different. You'd have to start over completely." Lyra gave a faint smile. "I've already had to start over once. I can do it again, if it means they'll be safe." Ethan nodded slowly, but she could see the hesitation in his eyes. "You should know," he said. "I might be sent somewhere else. I can't promise I'll be there." Her voice was quiet, but firm. "Maybe not right away, but I think you'd find us. You seem to have a habit of showing up when we need you." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan let out a small breath that sounded almost like a laugh. 2 days later, the colony transport arrived. A large, sturdy ship that could carry dozens of passengers. The air buzzed with a strange mix of excitement and fear as families prepared to leave. Lyra held her daughter's hands as they walked toward the boarding area. Ethan was already there, checking with the transport crew. He wasn't in his Relief Corps uniform today, just a simple jacket and boots. "You're coming?" she asked in surprise. He shrugged. "I asked for reassignment. Figured I've been moving from one broken city to another long enough. Maybe it's time I try building something instead." Her relief was quiet but deep. Sana and Mira both smiled at the sight of him, running to give him quick hugs before dashing back to the boarding line. The journey to the colony was long, but calm. From the ship's windows, they could see the stars stretch endlessly, each one a tiny spark in the dark. For Lyra's daughters, it was the first time they had looked at the sky without hearing sirens or seeing enemy ships. When they landed, the colony wasn't grand, just rows of sturdy housing units, fields under construction, and workshops buzzing with activity. But it was alive. There were humans and aliens working side by side, building homes, planting crops, and laughing over shared meals. For Lyra, it felt strange at first, but each day she found something new to hold on to. Mira's laughter as she played with other children, Sana's careful questions about planting seeds, the way the nights were quiet except for the soft hum of the wind, and Ethan was there. Sometimes working with the security teams, sometimes helping build new shelters, but always close enough to stop by, to check on them, to share a meal. Months later, Lyra stood at the edge of the settlement, watching the sun set over the fields. Sana and Mira were running ahead, their voices bright in the warm air. Ethan came up beside her, carrying a small box of tools from the day's work. "The place is starting to feel like a real home," he said. She nodded. "It is." He glanced at her. "Do you ever think about Alara Prime?" "Every day," she admitted, "but not with the same pain. It will always be where I lost everything, and where I got them back." She looked at him with a small smile. "And where I met you." Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out over the fields, where the girls were now chasing each other in the fading light. I guess that makes it worth going through, he said finally. Lyra's hand brushed his. He didn't pull away. For the first time since the war began, the future felt like something they could reach for, not with fear, but with hope.